Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Linder, your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show. This is a place where people come to talk not just about the innovations that they're working on, but the incredible stories that are told and need to be told in order to push big ideas across the finish line. And it's the reason why I'm so excited that Danielle McCormick is joining me today. If you don't know Danielle, you're going to, because Danielle is a force of nature. She's the kind of person who gets things done when people say impossible. And she has found ways of moving some of the biggest companies, including our very own defense contractors and Department of Defense and all that other good stuff, the biggest bureaucracies imaginable, into moving into innovation spaces that were otherwise thought to be deemed agonizing to work with. But Danielle has made it work. So let me tell you a little bit about Danielle. She is a battle-tested business strategist who transforms bureaucratic quagmires into high-performance engines. She has helped industry leaders like Southwest Airlines and Wayfair unlock over $1 billion in savings through surgical process redesign and strategic innovation. Danielle has also successfully navigated the notorious Valley of Death. And if you've been there, you don't want to go back, expertly guiding breakthrough technologies from early development to successful adoption within the complex defense market. As the founder of Immersive Insights, Danielle engineers resilient, adaptive systems for defense contractors entering commercial markets and Fortune 500 companies seeking operational edge. Her innovative approach to business enablement empowers organizations to become anti-fragile, positioning them to thrive and scale regardless of economic volatility or regulatory complexity. Danielle's strategic insights and actionable methodologies have made her a highly sought after advisor for executives determined to future-proof their businesses. And who doesn't need that today? Danielle, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Well, this is a great opportunity because number one, women in innovation, always applauded, love seeing them here. Number two is I want to thank our very good friend at Punks and Pinstripes
Yeah.
for uniting us. If you're not familiar with Punks and Pinstripes, people, please check it out. This is the place where we go to unleash and reveal our true selves and the agonies sometimes that come along with being an innovator. So shout out to all our friends at Punks and Pinstripes for bringing Danielle and me together. So Danielle, how did you get to innovation from your original perch out of school? How did you get here?
I have meandered through my career for sure. I started out, I was going to go into the family business. My entire family is federal law enforcement, and I really thought that was my path. And then I was also dancing at the time, ended up with a shoulder injury that precluded me from going to the police academy. So I figured I would do the next best thing and go into law. And I worked at a law firm for a couple of years, and it was really interesting. There were two attorneys that came from huge law firms, went out on their own, and I was employee number one. And so I was helping them get their clients together, get all their stuff together. And I found that I didn't love law at all.
Ooh,
But what
good
I
to
did
know.
love was the growth. And every time we grew and added attorneys and added staff and added clients, that we actually had to change our processes. And so that was actually really interesting to me, was how everything had a shelf life, and it only lasted until we had, 7 attorneys or 10 attorneys. So that was really quite interesting to me. So I went from there and started working in the project management realm in various roles, and found myself at Southwest Airlines, and I was working for them in what they call technical operations, or tech ops. That's maintenance. And when I was working with them, I stumbled into the front door of innovation completely. I was not planning on changing their operations. I was not planning on doing anything but what they'd asked me to do, which was to get a hangar approved, because in my project management meanderings, I worked for Gap, and I was building stores for Gap, and we had the whole central portion of the United States. So leases and all that kind of stuff were part of my purview. So when I was at Southwest, they said, we need a hangar approved. We've been trying to get this hangar approved. Corporate keeps telling us, no, we can't get it done, so on and so forth. And so that was actually where I really started to understand that getting people to tell you the problem is almost harder than fixing the problem and getting them to tell you exactly what it is that they need from you to say yes. And so going to these different meetings, first getting into the meeting, but going to these different meetings and finding out from, the VP of Airport Affairs and the folks in the government operations offices and things like that, that they were like, we don't even know what tech ops needs. So if you're telling us you need a hangar 1 year, when are you going to need your next one? Where does it need to be? What is this capacity? And they had basic questions as to why you would try to spend 60 to $100 million on a building that you don't have any strategic vision for. So that led me to putting together a essentially 20-year plan at the time. This was in 2015. So putting together a 20-year plan for them on right sizing their infrastructure. So I was putting together where the hangars were, where they needed to be, matching the jet acquisition schedule to the jet age, things like that, and working on where those hangars need to be. So,
Wait, Tanya, can we just stop for a heartbeat?
yeah,
How
absolutely.
many, I would love to know how many of my listeners, not that this is a call-in show, but I would
Sure.
love to know how many of my listeners have a 20-year plan in their
Mhm.
organization, right?
Right.
And the fact that you were able to stop, take a breath and go, wait a minute, let's think about this in the context of what it could be, not just what it
Mhm.
needs to be in this moment
Right.
is, like I wish I could say it wasn't radical thinking, but in today's shareholder capitalism, right, where we're
Yeah.
just focused on what the next quarter will bring, like it's such a, I don't know, I feel like such a breath of fresh air washing over me when I hear someone's actually thinking about a 20-year plan. I mean,
Right.
it's not like you're offering a moonshot, right? Some kind of like new technological breakthrough.
Right.
It's radical even just to be thinking this way in today's day and age.
Right. Right. And looking and actually really rejoining the business. And that was actually where I started to see that businesses don't grow at the same rate. This was my very first introduction to that, and that the departments in different businesses don't grow at the same rate at all. And so
Mm,
you had network planning, you had the commercial folks, the people making money, right? Your revenue generators were
sure.
running full speed at the market and trying to get depth and breadth and things like that. Well, we didn't have that on the maintenance side. And especially because they work at night, it was like they didn't exist. And so you had about a 40% undersized infrastructure footprint to be able to work on the airplanes. And so what was supposed to be irregular operations was happening every single day.
Wow. So
So,
it's like crisis hair on fire kind of stuff, but all the
yes.
different pieces weren't connecting because it wasn't their problem.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was also trying to fight the narrative of, well, if we approve this one hangar, then you're good for a long time. Well, no, that barely digs us out. It doesn't
Mm,
even dig us out. Actually, we need this location, we need this location, and this third one in rapid succession to even get to even, not to mention growth and match the pace of growth. So it started with not the intent necessarily to go out 20 years, but to really fight that narrative of one and done, and we don't need to fund you anymore.
mm, fascinating. So how'd you do it?
So it started with bringing up the jet acquisition schedule because they kept talking about how they were going to be buying jets, buying jets, buying jets. Well, where are you going to put them? Where exactly are you going to work on these things? And at the time, that was when the 500s were still, the 737 500s were still in the fleet. They were starting to retire those, and the airplanes were only getting bigger. So that was another issue that we had was they went from 300s and 500s, which are considerably smaller airplanes, to 700s and 800s, which are very much larger. Well, your buildings don't grow with your airplane size. So then you have a
What
lot
now?
of, right? I know it's weird, but you have capacity constraints just by the sheer factor that you're buying different equipment. So it was showing what that the fact that as everything gets older, right? We all have to go to the doctor, our cars have to go into maintenance, like everything needs more attention as it ages. And our jets were not getting younger either. So I started
Mm,
with showing what it was, where we needed to be, where we are now, and then what the future demand, both from the age of the jets as well as the new ones coming into the fleet, would require. And that only got me part of the way. But as we started to show how the capacity would change and the constraints would change and the delays that we were actually seeing day over day would change with this additional capacity in the system, then that started to shift the perspective of the folks around me and the approvers for those projects.
Mhm. Got it. So, what were the stories that you needed to tell to get people on board with this kind of whole shifting mindset?
Actually, it was I partially told stories and then actually made a conversion. So I started to notice that as we were in these different capacity meetings, that network planning seemed to understand what airport affairs was talking about, and airport affairs seemed to understand what the ground ops were talking about, but it didn't go more than 1 degree removed.
Mhm.
And they had like one gate meant you could turn 10 flights in a day, 11 if you were stretching it. And so I just put in a conversion table of if network planning was going to up the schedule by X amount of flights, then that meant we were going to need so many gates, which meant we were going to need so many additional airplanes to come to go to sleep at night at the airport, which meant so many extra had to be worked on, which meant maintenance mechanics would need to be there to do that. And then the space required for them to actually work on those airplanes. So it took it from the squeakiest wheel gets the money to math that you really couldn't refute. And it's like, okay, well, if you don't want to put in the investment, then I guess you don't want to grow. And
Mm.
kind of flipped it back to them on that because it was very like, prove it to me why you need the money, or actually prove to me why you don't want to grow. And so I was able to flip that around to my advantage of it wasn't so difficult to get something pushed through.
Well, I mean, given all the different departments that you were working with, all of whom had different kind of competing interests
Mhm.
and really one hand didn't care what the other was doing, right?
Right.
Everyone wanted it to go smoothly. You know, this process of, within design thinking called empathy mapping is when you actually stop for a minute and think about who am I talking to? Why
Right.
does it matter what I'm saying to them? And who is influencing them before I ever start speaking, before I ever start telling them the story of how their effort and their behavior has to change in order to hit that immediate goal and the 20-year goal. And
Mhm.
for listeners, these two questions, the two most critical questions are number one, what is the pain that my audience is currently experiencing? So for those night shift workers, right, adding 4 more hours onto a grueling night shift, that might be the pain they're currently experiencing.
Mhm.
But it's completely different for the ELT, right? Just a different world altogether. And then the other is what is the gain? So the pain might be the 4 hour shift, but it might be the pain is we don't have enough bodies here,
Mhm.
right? The gain that I hope to get is that we need to grow this team by 20% if we're going
Yes.
to keep up. Or it might be I want to be promoted to foreman of this team, or it might be for the CEO, I want giant shareholder dividend and I'd really like a nice bonus at the end of the year for hitting my numbers.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
getting really clear about those incentives is so important and the agony that people are actively experiencing.
Yes, yes, exactly. So on the corporate side, and again, this was more around the space actual footprint where they were working on the airplanes. And so we were able to put that plan in, for 20 years. Now, I have no idea, especially based on where their company is now, if that plan has survived. I haven't been with them in many years. But putting that plan in place, but then also starting to see and work backwards on how do we actually future proof that? How do we make sure that this plan does endure? And to the best that we can from the moment we are in, now and as far in the future as our crystal ball will allow us to see. And so that's actually where we started to see truly the impact of the night overnight operations and where we could make a lot of adjustments and really very small adjustments. We only changed two processes and added a handful of folks to get access to the aircraft routing system to then be able to unlock $1 billion worth of utilization in the short term. So that was in their daily operations, where and how they were routing the aircraft. And you were asking about the stories that we tell. Yes, exactly. Getting the folks and the mechanics to tell us the stories, which was huge because it's a heavily unionized environment. So really coming to them with that empathetic approach, with that, hey, I am trying to help you. I am not from corporate. I'm not trying to pin you to the wall on, why are you charging overtime or why are you this? This is not a pedantic endeavor. This is tell me what it is that you're experiencing, because the computer systems are telling us something completely different. And it looks like you guys are fine. But then when we talk to union workers, when we go to the actual front lines, we're hearing a very, very, very different narrative from them. So the getting their buy-in there, and I worked with them in lockstep. So there were times that I would go and I would do, all my discovery, and then I would come back and I'd draw it on the whiteboard for them, for the mechanics, for their and for their supervisors. And I'm like, okay, break this process. Because I know you're going to do it anyway. You're going to do it at 4 a.m. when no one's looking, when no one at corporate is able to monitor you. You're going to do it because it's cold and you're in Chicago. You're going to do it because it's late and you don't want to. You're going to do it because it's the, fourth day or fourth week that you've worked in solid with no days off. Like, you're going to keep doing these things that are going to make your life easier. So how do you help me make an unbreakable process? And getting their buy-in there also really helped to build something that was really robust, but also to uncover things that I didn't even know was happening in the operation, that they were like, yeah, I'm not going to do that if you put that into the steps I must do.
Wow. Right. So finding out that pushback up front is so critical.
Oh yeah. They're like, if you tell us to do that, we're not doing it. And I mean, but getting the transparency there was huge as well, for them to be like, yeah, and not just like, nod along that this was a good idea.
Wow. Wow. So Southwest is one of the major corporations that you've worked with, but you've also worked with the Department of Defense, right? And different defense contractors. And that is no easy task. I mean, it is literally the biggest organization in the world.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the work you did there.
Sure. So after I left Southwest, stayed in the aviation space, if you will, and started working with the Air Force on drones, and actually more of a focus on counter drone. So working with the Air Force Research Lab, they were moving out on a particular technology that could, it was an radio frequency based, and it could sense or pick up the frequencies from the ground control station to the drone, and would alert within a certain radius that this was there. And that's very needed technology in the time. I know most of your listeners have probably seen all of the drone usage in Israel, all of the drone usage across the Ukrainian conflict. And so this is a very real issue with weaponized toys, essentially. And how you can, with weaponized toys, can take a very small, very inexpensive item, modify it, and now it can do major damage to very, very expensive pieces of equipment. So being able to understand where these are, being able to stop those drones, being able to deter and deflect them from your protected area was really required. And the bigger piece is that, or I should say the valley of death, is when technologies are coming out of the research and development space and going into the full rate production for commercialization and proliferation. So that's a lot of words to say. It's got to go from the lab and go sell a lot.
Right. Which is
Yeah.
not a natural function,
No.
right, of a defense contractor. Like, you have
No.
one customer, right? The thing is, like, you had to do one thing. You had to sell
Yep.
this thing.
One job.
Right. Exactly. You had one job. And then suddenly it's like, but wait, this stuff is really good. How do we get it
Yeah.
out to the rest of the folk who could benefit from it?
Yes. And so that's actually where I started to see that the defense sector, by and large, is a vacuum for business sense, because they're so used to being paid by the hour to create whatever the widget is. And then now they're suddenly supposed to flip on a dime, pun intended, but flip on a dime to start full rate production and be a unit product based business. And that's a complete shift down to their, core taxation. So this is something that's very, very difficult for them to do. And so in working with these different defense contractors, showcasing how it is that they can, again, the stories we tell, yes, you're making 7% margin on doing a paid by the hour, Or you can make 60% margin once we actually move this over to be a full rate production product. But you have to be willing to do the work in between to get from A to B. And that A to B jump is painful. Like, talk about passing like a kidney stone. It's hard.
It might be more realistic to say it's A to Q, right? It
Yes.
might not be an
Oh,
A to
yes.
B.
Yes, exactly. A to Q. Because you're also, I mean, there's a number of things you have to negotiate, even down to, can I even take what I built with the government and go sell it on my own? And that's its own negotiation because it was co-created with the government. So is that something that they want to keep? Is that something that I can keep? Is that something that we share on some negotiated basis to go and actually sell? And what we get really caught down in the dollars and cents, but the main thing that if this process doesn't work, is that our sons and daughters and husbands and uncles and people overseas that are deployed don't have the protection from the drones that they need. And that's really where we tend to get lost, is we're like, well, can I sell this product? Can I this? Well, what about, how do we get it out to the warfighter? How do we get it out to the people that really need to be protected from drones? And how do we get this in their hands so that they can come home?
And so how'd you do it? What's the story that got told there?
Well, it was, so some of that was actually telling the engineering teams that even make these products. We had to do a whole lot of revamping for someone that is very young, that is right out of high school. And because a lot of our warfighters are very young.
We
And
forget that, right? We forget
yes,
like the average soldier that went to Vietnam was 19, right?
right.
And
Mhm.
our armed forces are young people.
Yes, yes. And so in you have kind of a almost two camps, if you will. You have very young, tech savvy, operationally inexperienced, or you tend to have older, operationally experienced, but not tech savvy. So you're trying to build for that customer that can easily consume the information. And so setting metrics and setting requirements for the engineers, that whoever is looking at the system, it does not matter. Once they look at this alert on a screen, they need to know within 5 seconds exactly what it is, what they're looking at, what they need to do, and to kick off an approval loop so that they can do some type of defense if approved to do so.
Hmm.
And getting the engineering team to realize that the time that they have to make a decision is so short that they're not sitting in front of the screen with all this experience and they've been looking at it and building it for years. They just need to know, like, it's blinking at me and it's yelling at me and I need to know what to do about it.
Right.
Right. So really bringing that grounding of your customer and bringing that, who is sitting in front of your screen is who you're building for. And again, that's a huge shift because it's no longer a PhD at the Air Force Research Lab. It's an 18-year-old kid that's deployed. So telling that story there to help the engineering team come along with it. And then also bringing forward a very customer service focus. That is a very, very sparse finding in the DoD. Normally companies,
Alien, one might say.
yes, people drop off equipment and they're like, good luck. And so we really made inroads with our customer in that at any point you can get a human. At any point you can text us. We would put them in a like a signal chat or something like that with us, as far as just, here's the hotline. And it had our engineering team, it had our growth team, and it had our data management team. And so they could get an answer on no matter what it was. I can't pull this report. I don't know what this means. The system went down, whatever that is. And we could remotely manage that problem for them within a number of hours.
Right. And so you did all that on Signal, right? I mean, like, it wasn't like you had to set up a whole new
No.
technology or anything. This, I'm like, communication is so central to
Yes.
innovation. And yet we like put it as like the last thing on the list. When
Uh-huh.
actually we just need a human to talk to, someone who's actually able to process the problem and then get it solved. Like, it's just
Yes.
sometimes to me, like these fundamental, I mean, you are taking a Herculean task, right, of trying to take military technologies. I've now learned that that's called dual use based on a
Yes.
conference that I was at, and apply it to civilian uses and go, wow,
Mhm.
it could unlock so much commercial potential,
Mhm.
so like create huge high margin businesses. And at the base of it is, as an engineer, talk to an 18-year-old and vice versa. Right. And
Yes.
I mean, That's a multi-generational communication conversation.
Right, right. And also
In
even
its
be
own right.
willing to help the folks that are needing the equipment, but then everybody has a boss, right? So then they have to go and talk to their leadership. Well, this whole drone space has only been around for a few years. And at this point, it's not a real job in the military. It's kind of whoever was an enthusiast or drew the short straw. So
Mm.
you're now having to help them explain to their leadership, but a lot of folks aren't willing to do that. So there were many times that I was in a briefing with somebody's boss's boss to try to help them understand the threat, help them understand the issue, what the capability would do for them, and then how they needed to move forward for getting that capability in-house.
Mm. And at the end of the day, like you're helping to move this thing along. It's amazing, right? People are such a pain in the neck, right? It's that we actually have to move those people along and get them
Yes.
talking in a way that they haven't before that just shifts everything.
Hmm. Yes. And also getting your teams. I mean, there's so much of this is also about your team, not only internal dynamics, but also then how you deal with the customer and how you, so you're doing your own empathy map with them. But I feel like there's just as much of having to do that with your team, especially if your team started in one realm and is now having to apply all their skills completely differently.
Mm.
And I had a lot of folks that were very much like, nope, I'm an engineer. I don't talk to customers. And
They
so,
have cooties. They
yeah, they're
have
like, ew, no,
cooties.
I don't
We
talk
don't
to
deal with
customers.
them.
Yeah. So I was like, so if there was commission involved, would you talk to customers? They're like, hmm.
Maybe, maybe.
So yeah, that's actually how I put in various levels, I should say, about 7 different ways to pay people to get their buy-in
Incentives.
internally. So that, and it doesn't touch the bottom line of the business. It doesn't take anything from the business. It's all incentive based, but it allows the employees to also choose their own adventure and invest and go along the ride with you in a way that doesn't feel like they're giving all and not getting.
Right. Um, God, I just love this conversation. So we've reached the point of the podcast where I'm going to ask you now the 3 hot seat questions.
Okay, go.
So, what is the greatest innovation of all time?
What is the greatest innovation of all time? Huh. I personally think the telephone is.
Mm,
I do, because I mean, you think about, and I don't think it's email. I think it's the phone. The ability to get from one human to another without anything else in between. Not a letter, not a postman, not a horse, not a not your email inbox and all the spam and whatnot in between. I think that the greatest and most enduring innovation is that person to person communication across the globe and would be the telephone.
awesome. If you had the chance to join any innovation team in human history, which team would you have joined?
The I would have joined NASA.
Mm,
Putting the whole man on the moon, doing that moonshot for the first time. Yeah, that's I'm a total space nerd. I love all things that fly, but I definitely space. I find it just absolutely fascinating that not only would you take that on, but then to actually be able to see that through and get people up and back. So
yeah.
that would definitely be the team.
And what is the innovation you wish existed in the world that does not today? Something that really annoys you that you'd love to see fixed, or something that you just wish all humanity had?
I don't know if it's necessarily an innovation, and maybe it is, but where we really bring our employees and employers together. That actually is one of my biggest passions.
What do you
Is
mean?
how, because it's become a very take, like somebody has to win, right? If you're working overtime but not necessarily getting paid for it, or if you're trying to get to the next promotion, you're working like crazy to hope somebody notices. But if you can bring together that incentive based piece, if you can bring together the win-win, if you can bring together a way where it's not so adversarial at work, then because employers are viewing employees as, well, they're stealing, they want this, they want more. And then on the same side of the employees are doing, well, I'm not getting raises, I'm not getting this, I'm not, all the employer wants is more hours for less pay. or more education for less starting salary or any of those kinds of things. And I feel like just bringing down those barriers, there are ways to do it, but I have a huge passion for people not having the Sunday scaries and not hating to go to work. So that's actually one of the big pieces behind all the process that I've done. Yes, I've done the deep dive spelunking into various organizations and various industries, to help enable and unlock certain pieces of utilization or profitability or whatnot. But at its core, what gives me my fulfillment is the people that I get to work with on the front lines, the people that are actually utilizing whatever it is that we're working with, that their lives are improved by a better process, that they don't have as much crap to deal with day over day, and they can enjoy why they even joined this profession or this company in the first place.
Oh, I love it. Danielle, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Special shout out to Greg Larkin once again
Absolutely.
at Punks and Pinstripes. We're just
Yes.
thrilled that we got to be friends for this fantastic meetup. And Danielle, if people want to get in contact with you and Immersive Insights, how should they do that?
They can go to our website and drop us a note there. And yeah, love to get to know anybody that finds this interesting.
Fantastic. Danielle McCormick, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
So much, Susan. It's been such a pleasure.